I am not positive that Matthew wrote Matthew or that Mark wrote Mark, but there is solid evidence that they did. But guess what? What does it matter whether Matthew wrote Matthew or not?
Because you're claiming these are authoritative historical accounts, that these are written by one person as their claim.
I did not say they were written by one person. I said they were written by different people, and I said that the evidence is they are historically reliable. They were written in the 1st century. And the reason we know that is because the early church fathers, like Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, Clement, Bishop of Rome, quote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in letters that they write.
A college student stands face to face with Cliffe, armed with sharp objections and zero intention of backing down. The debate cuts straight to the bone. Is there a God? Can Jesus be trusted? And does morality even exist without a creator? Cliffe, a seasoned apologist, argues that faith in Christ is the most rational decision a person can make, backed by the historical evidence of the resurrection. The student fires back, insisting that evidence is too thin, that morality is relative, and that humanity's collective wisdom outweighs any single belief system. What begins as a historical argument quickly spirals into a raw collision over truth, reason, and the very foundation of human value. Who actually has the stronger case? Let's step into the conversation.
No, he respects your free will, but I think it's real clear he's not going to play games with you. He's not going to allow you to manipulate him. See, that's the way Jesus treated people. When you read the Gospels, you'll notice Jesus loved people, and he spoke the truth to them. And a young guy comes up to Jesus one day and says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "You know the commands," ticks them off. The guy's following him and says, "I've done them all." Jesus takes the 10th commandment, "Thou shalt not covet," turns it into a practical test and says, "My man, go out, sell all your possessions, give to the poor, and come and follow me." The guy puts his head down and walks away. And Jesus doesn't run after the guy saying, "Oh, no, wait a second." He's spoken very clearly, very lovingly to the young man, and the young man walks away. And Jesus lets him walk. He'll let me walk, Austin. He'll let you walk.
So it seems like a punishment to me to give. It's sort of a false choice. So I'm giving you free will. I'm giving you the choice to find Jesus and find me. It's a choice in quotes. But if you don't choose, then you're condemned to eternal pain or condemned to hell. What kind of a choice is that? How much of free will is that?
That's very simple. The same choice that you have to have unprotected sex and get a sexually transmitted disease.
Oh, that's not the magnitude of pain and misery that results from a sexually transmitted disease is nowhere the magnitude of pain and misery that results from eternal
Obviously, we agree. That was not my point. Your point was, if there are consequences to my free will, then you're taking away my free will. That's the erroneous line of your thinking, Austin. Just because there are consequences to my free will doesn't mean that my free will is being taken away. The University of Arizona does not take his free will away by saying, "You flunk, you will be kicked out of this university." That is not depriving him of free will, but it is saying, "Sir, if you don't pass your exams, you will flunk out of this place." It's that simple.
University of Arizona is not the one who supposedly gifted him with free will in the first place. We're talking about God. If God is the agent that creates free will in the first place, and then goes, "Oh, by the way, you have free will, but you have these two choices in front of you, but one of them is infinitely preferable to the other." It's not really a choice. That's not really free will. The U of A didn't give him free will. He already had it coming here. And the U of A is also not a divine entity that controls the entire universe.
Sir, I hope you respect free will. I hope you enjoy free will. If you don't have free will, you can't love. A machine cannot love because a machine does not have free will. You know very, very well that in order to love, you've got to have free will. Let's say he's been dating a young lady for the past 6 weeks. She says to him, "I love you, I love you, I love you." And he says, "Wow, that's cool." Tonight, his father calls him up and says, "Son, I've been paying her $1,000 a week to love you." Guy would be royally bummed out, wouldn't you? Of course you would. Why? Because love, in order to be real, has got to be free. If it ain't free, it ain't love. So God creates us to love him and to love each other.
It
which
seems
means
to
we
me
are
a
free.
better thing to not be given this free will and to avoid the potential of eternal damnation than it does to be given the free will and potentially condemn myself to eternal hellfire. That doesn't seem like true love. If God is going to allow some of his creations, when he has it completely within his means, he knows of all ways to to guide us away from this, and he has all means by which to accomplish that. Why does he then allow some of his beloved creations to condemn themselves to eternal damnation?
Because he created us as human beings, not as human machines. He created us with this incredible capacity to love, which means we have to be free. Do you really want to take away your freedom?
No, he doesn't have. We don't have to lose our free will entirely to be guided towards Jesus and towards God. We can have free will on a huge range of issues, and he doesn't even have to take away the free will in this particular one. Like for myself, if God would give me some sort of sign or come to me personally or something of that nature, give me a little bit more evidence because I'm thus far unconvinced by the evidence I see, then he would guide me away from this eternal damnation, which I assume he knows that I would not prefer. And because he loves me, he doesn't want to see me get what I don't prefer. It would just take like a little bit of effort on the part of God to guide me away from this in his loving manner.
Why were the people who were alive when Jesus was around? Why did they get miracles? Why doesn't anyone else? And that was only one part of the world. So many people. Those people needed miracles to be able to find Jesus, but no one else did. No one else deserved that same. Basically, like here we are. Here's Jesus going around. He clearly has God's power, God's grace, but no one else needs to see this. Was their free will taken away by Jesus showing up and performing miracles and giving teachings personally? Did they have less free will than us?
Obviously, all those people who saw the miracles of Christ, every single one of them doubted. All of the apostles ran away from Christ when he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. One of his 12 closest friends, Judas Iscariot, betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. Peter denied knowing him 3 times. So obviously, we all struggle with doubt. Now the question is, what do you do with your doubt? Do you let your doubt harden into unbelief? Or do you continue to pursue the evidence, continue to cry out to God on a subjective level as well as objectively looking at the evidence, and seek then to grow in faith in him? Or is there a better option? And obviously, if there's a better option than Christ, I, for one, am interested. If Christ is not the truth, then I want to follow the truth. But you see, I have found that the best reason to believe in Jesus Christ is because the evidence is he's the truth. And I don't want to believe a lie. I don't want to live in fantasy land. So if there is a better option to Jesus, I want to know it. So please tell me.
Better option for what?
More trustworthy, more in touch with reality, more in touch with truth than Christ. Then I want to follow him. I don't want to follow a lie.
May I suggest checking out some comic books at a comic book store? The Superman comics have just as much legitimacy as the Bible. They were written by people about a person with superpowers.
The Superman comic books that you buy in a store,
yes,
are obviously legends, fairy tale, mythology. The Gospels are obviously historical narrative. Jesus is not Iron Man. Jesus is not Superman. Jesus was a real historical person who lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead.
And where is your historical evidence for that over other fairy tales? Why, for example, is Thor a fairy tale, but Jesus not?
When you read comic books, you will study the literary style and realize this is make-believe. When you read the New Testament Gospels, and when you read the Quran, and when you read the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, you'll begin to understand this is historical teaching and individuals. If anybody comes up to me and say, hey, you know, man, Buddha was a myth. Buddha's like Iron Man or Superman. I'm going to say, I'm sorry. The overwhelming historical evidence is Siddhartha Gautama Buddha was a real historical person. And if anybody comes up to me and says, oh yeah, Muhammad is a myth, an Arabian Nights myth, I'm going to say, I'm sorry. The overwhelming historical evidence is Muhammad was a real space-time person. Well, the same thing is true of Jesus. The Gospels are not written in mythology or legend or romance literature. What, the Iliad and the Odyssey? Epic poetry. So when Homer writes the Iliad and the Odyssey, it's not historical narrative. The literary style is epic poem. Fine. Now, The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not epic poem. They're not mythology. They're not once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wynken, Blynken, and Odd took a boat ride. No, it's at this time, in this place, with these people around. Jesus said this, he did that, we saw it, we're writing what we saw.
I've actually taken quite a few classes, and yeah, they're written in literary styles. They're written by multiple people. Each gospel isn't even written by one person. One of the gospels was comprised of the other gospels being put together with some additional stories. These things are oral traditions written down, and they look exactly like oral traditions written down. They don't look like historical evidence.
Well, of course they were first oral traditions, because the eyewitnesses of Christ first spoke about Christ. They didn't write a gospel right as they're watching Christ die on a cross. They didn't have their pens and paper out, guys. Obviously, there was an oral tradition, and then that oral tradition was written down in the form of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Obviously, that's true.
That doesn't make it history.
No, I know it doesn't make it history, but it's an important point when you're pursuing historical knowledge. Now, just listen to the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke is crystal clear. It's the literary style of historical narrative. It could not be any more clear. Luke begins the Gospel of Luke by writing the following words. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught. I'm sorry, sir, that is not once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wynken, Blynken, and Odd took a boat ride. It's not Iron Man and Superman got together and defeated Thor. It's, sir, we have seen these things. I'm writing down what I have seen. Crystal clear.
Claiming a thing that is true, claiming a thing is true, and writing it down does not make it true. The Blair Witch Project is presented as factual. It's presented as some found footage. We've got plenty of examples of fiction that are presented in this light. And I'm not questioning the fact that the people who wrote these things, they believed them. But for example, Paul, who is the great proselytizer of the ancient world, he was not a witness to any of these events. He heard stories. The people who wrote these were not the actual apostles.
How do you know that? In light of the fact that the word Matthew is not attached to the Gospel of Matthew in the earliest manuscripts we have,
right?
Where on earth do you get off saying, oh no, Matthew didn't write Matthew? You don't know that. The same way I don't know that Matthew did write Matthew.
Because
let's be honest, buddy. Let's not start writing mythology on our own.
The church later attached their names to it to add authority.
Yeah, there was a strong tradition that pointed to Matthew was the author of the Gospel of Matthew. But I don't know that Matthew wrote it for sure, and you don't know for sure that he didn't. So let's be honest with each other and not, create mythology out here.
I'm not sure that my house isn't on fire right now. I obviously don't know because you and I weren't there. But the overwhelming historical evidence is that the apostles didn't write it.
Not baloney. There is plenty of early testimony
even
that Matthew wrote Matthew.
Don't believe this.
Look, sir, if you don't understand that there are liberal Bible theologians like Rudolf Bultmann, Paul Tillich, like the Jesus Seminar, you better start thinking, because you're not thinking. Obviously, Rudolf Bultmann taught there were many different people that wrote the Gospels, and they really didn't know what they were talking about. The only problem is when you study the tests that Rudolf Bultmann used to determine whether the Gospels were authentic or not, if you take those same tests the way C.S. Lewis did and apply them to Rudolf Bultmann, you come up with 5 different Rudolf Bultmanns writing what Bultmann wrote. In other words, they are unfairly stringent tests. So let's be honest intellectually, and let's not start ripping it off the wall. Let's stick with the facts. And the facts are that many early people like Papias and Polycarp clearly wrote that Matthew was the one who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. But they were not eyewitnesses. They lived after, so we're not positive. So you're absolutely right. I am not positive that Matthew wrote Matthew or that Mark wrote Mark. But there is solid evidence that they did. But guess what? What does it matter whether Matthew wrote Matthew or not?
Because you're claiming these are authoritative historical accounts, that these are written by one person as their claim.
I did not say they were written by one person. I said they were written by different people, and I said that the evidence is they are historically reliable. They were written in the 1st century. And the reason we know that is because the early church fathers, like Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, Clement, Bishop of Rome, quote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in letters that they write. So it's crystal clear that the Gospels were written in the 1st century. It used to be taught on this campus and every other state university campus 50, 100 years ago that, oh no, the Gospels were not written until the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th century, hundreds of years after Christ.
I'm not aware of that scholarship.
That whole school of thought has been smashed. Why? Because we have found more and more manuscripts that go closer and closer to the 1st century. So that whole school of thought's been smashed.
Just because we moved the date because we found more evidence from 6th century to 1st century doesn't mean we're going to continue to find more evidence that moves it closer and closer to,
I never said that. I said that the evidence we have today clearly points to the Gospels being written in the 1st century. We have a very reliable historical record of Jesus of Nazareth.
Simply writing something down and say, this is true, it's absolutely true, I swear it's true. People swear things are true all the time that aren't true. Either because they believe them to be true and they're not, and they want them to be true, or because they're just being deceptive.
Sorry. Matthew, John died for what they claim to have seen. The dead Christ risen from the dead.
People die all the time for
Not for a lie. You're right. People die all the time for their belief. But they don't die to cover up what they know to be a lie. Just look at Watergate. Dean, Ehrlichman, Haldeman, 3 brilliant American lawyers, were not willing to go through prison to cover up what they knew to be a lie. You're right. People die for what they believe is true, but people are not willing to die for what they know to be a lie. Psychology shows that crystal clearly.
Depends on how important that lie is.
Baloney. Give me one example of someone who dies to cover up what they know to be a lie. Give me one example. I could hardly wait to hear it.
Someone who wants, not a specific example, but someone who wants to protect their children.
How
They
unfortunate.
say, no,
How unfortunate you can't give one example. Are you being honest? If you make these blanket statements and you can't back them up, are you being honest?
You made an exclusive statement that this thing doesn't exist, and you've asked me to prove that anyone anywhere has died to basically keep a lie secret. Of course, people have at some point died to keep some lie secret. Like the lie of where their child is when someone's coming to harm their child, and they lie about that, and they die to protect that. That's not.
Sir, that is not dying to cover up what they know to be a lie. Come on, think with me, sir. You're sharp. You're intelligent. Come on now. It's not fair.
Perhaps we could conceive of in World War II, there might have been at least 1 or 2 Nazis who were fighting in the German army that knew for a fact that Jews were not lower than anybody else, and yet they fought and died in that war for something that they knew to be a lie. Could you conceive of that? Does that seem conceivable at least?
No, sir. The Nazis were not convinced that Jews were wonderful, valuable people, and they went ahead and murdered them. The Nazis who murdered the Jews were convinced that the Jews needed to be murdered.
You can't conceive of at least one good conscience Nazi who killed a Jew, knowing full well that Jews are not below anybody else.
That's totally different, sir. Don't you see? Come on, Austin. You're sharper than that.
It's not different.
Of course it's different.
They kill.
The Nazi is killing Jews because they've got guys behind them telling them to shoot the Jews. They've got guys behind them telling them, we're going to court-martial you if you don't kill the Jews. That's radically different from dying in order to cover up what you know to be a lie.
Nazis that didn't believe Jews were lower died in World War II.
They didn't die to cover up a lie. No, they didn't.
That's exactly what they died for.
No, sir. False, Austin. And Austin, that's been my point to you. You're sharp. You're intelligent. But you step into some deep pits that really make me question what's really driving you, Austin. There is no comparison between a Japanese soldier dying for Japan as opposed to an eyewitness of Christ rising from the dead, standing before a Roman soldier, and the Roman soldier says, say Caesar is Lord and live, or else maintain that your Jesus is risen from the dead and we'll kill you for it. And the guy says inside, well, I know Jesus didn't rise from the dead. I never saw him, but I'm going to die to perpetuate the lie. Come on, Austin, think. It's crystal clear there's a difference.
It just seems to me that when you read the Bible, you talk about literary style, and when you read things, I'll concede that some of it's written in a very historical manner without regarding the issue of how accurate that is. It seems to me when you read things about talking snakes and people popping out of people's ribs, people living in whales, whole planets flooding, things like that seems like the stuff that comic books are made out of.
Sir, a woman popping out of Adam's rib is not an historical record of what happened. It's in the book of Genesis. It's not in the Gospels that talk about Jesus. And I can promise you that when Genesis talks about God took Adam's rib and made woman, that is not a scientific description of how God created woman.
No.
Can't you allow a writer to use some figurative speech? When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, you think he's claiming to be a 100-watt light bulb? If you have a contradiction, you've got a contradiction. The law of non-contradiction applies to every part of the Bible, which is A and non-A cannot both be true at the same time in the same way. And you have absolutely no contradictions anywhere in the Bible. Now, do you have difficult passages? Yes, you do. The flood account is an example of a difficult passage. So is the creation of Eve out of Adam's rib. Difficult passage, I agree. But come on, man. We're talking about literature that's over 2,000 years old. We're talking about people who were not concerned about the scientific question like you and I are.
Because people didn't really know science then.
Exactly. And that was not part of the agenda. So it's a little unfair to jam people who wrote a document 3,000 years ago into my scientific requirements.
The laws of nature existed and operated just as they did.
Yeah, but they're not contradicting the laws of nature if they talk about the whole earth as the whole known world.
I would say someone rising from the dead is pretty close to contradicting the laws of nature.
Yeah.
And it's not a claim that extraordinary, but it's going to take more than a few people saying they saw it to convince me of something like that.
Obviously, you and I agree. Someone rising from the dead contradicts the laws of nature. Bravo. We all agree on that. Now, the question is there a supernatural God who can contradict the law of nature by changing a law of nature and doing what you and I call a miracle? The whole point of the Bible is not, oh, by the way, dead people rise all the time. No, the point of the Bible is, naturally, dead people do not rise from the dead. But because there's a supernatural God, it's not irrational to believe that this supernatural God can perform a miracle and raise a dead man to life.